All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia, and I'm part of the learning team here at REEDSY. I'm standing in for REEDSY Live's regular host, Martin, today. And while we wait for everyone to tune in, feel free to say hello in the chat. And I'm actually here a little bit early with my guest, Tom Bromley. Hi, Tom. How are you doing today?
Evening, Felicia. I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Tom is going to be opening up his virtual office door to answer all your questions about writing, editing, and getting published in just a few minutes. But while we're kind of hanging out here in the green room and waiting to get started, I thought I'd kind of take the opportunity to ask him some fun questions. So there's this saying that to be a great writer, you also need to be an avid reader. And Tom, you kind of strike me as someone who does read quite a lot. Do you have a favorite author?
I have many favourite authors. This is probably the short answer. It sort of varies from time to time. So I think when I started writing, the author who I really loved was Raymond Carver, who was an American short story writer from the early '80s. So I just loved his style. But recently, I sort of read all the Henning Mankell books. I loved the kind of the Wallander series, and then Mick Herron. I devoured. Probably at the moment it's John le Carre, who's a writer who I really love. I think he's an amazing writer, and so yeah, read a lot of his work. I have to say. How about yourself?
Oh, I've also it's a hard one. I also feel like I have quite a few that I kind of am working my way through. When I was at uni, I kind of discovered Toni Morrison for the first time. So over the years, I've been kind of slowly working my way through her books. But yeah, I like to read a lot of kind of contemporary stuff as well. So it's always fun when you kind of see or find out about new authors, debut authors, things like that.
Yeah, I think there's nothing better than finding a new writer and enjoying a book, and then going back and reading the whole kind of back catalogue. I think that's exciting. I did that with Claire Keegan a couple of years ago. Sort of loves small things like these, wasn't it? I think it was called. And then
Yeah, I've read a couple
when
and they're always really like impactful despite being quite short.
yeah, I think having everyone, they're brilliant writing and amazing, as you say, tiny little books, but kind of so much going on in them. It works very well.
Yeah, that's really cool. And yeah, if you guys are kind of just tuning in, don't worry. We haven't kind of officially gotten started yet. Tom and I are just having a little chat here in the green room while we wait. And yeah, I think I have time for like one more question before we kind of dive into things. If you had to pick just one book, do you have a desert island book?
Goodness, that is yeah. Uh, well, I guess you think about how long you might spend on the desert island. So, I mean, going back to Raymond Carver, I'd probably choose something like the collected short stories of Raymond Carver would be my kind of starting point. But, maybe something like Robinson Crusoe, which for my sins I've never read, but that would feel an appropriate thing to read if you
That's
were
a
kind
good.
of washed up somewhere. There might be a
I
few tips in there, I think,
Yeah,
perhaps.
survival tips. Yeah, I did read that one at uni, but it's been quite a long time since I actually think I made it through the whole the whole thing, but can't remember
I,
any
I it,
tips.
yeah. I did have once. I had a year, and I was teaching English in Japan. And when we got to the airport, we had too much stuff, so I had to kind of junk all our books to kind of get under the weight. So I had one book until we got sent more books about kind of 3 months on, and that was a history of the world in 10.5 chapters by Julian Barnes. And I read and reread that for 3 months. So
Oh,
I know that
amazing.
book by the back of my hand. So sometimes you do get these situations where you do just have the one book, and it can be kind of really effective.
That's great to be able to go back and kind of savor something and read it again and again. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. All right. Well, we're kind of nearing 8 o'clock here, so I might take you off screen for a little bit. And
Okay.
yeah, we're gonna get started in just a few seconds. Yeah, I see lots of people here tuning in. Hi everyone, it's now 8 p.m. here in London, which means it's 3 p.m. over in the East Coast, and it's time to get started. Hi everyone, Welcome to REEDSY'S Live, our ongoing series of webinars where we invite guests from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. My name is Felicia and I'm part of the learning team here at REEDSY, and I'm standing in for REEDSY Live's regular host, Martin, today. I'll be chatting to my guest, Tom Bromley, the creator of REEDSY'S How to Write a Novel course, and he's going to be opening up his virtual office door to answer all your questions about creative writing, editing, and the road to getting published. And Tom is also going to tell you a little bit more about his How to Write a Novel course, which guides you through the process of drafting a novel from start to finish. And if you're interested in joining us, our next cohort is starting on September 2nd, and stick around until the end of the webinar for an exclusive offer. But without further ado, let me introduce my guest today. So my guest today is the head of learning here at REEDSY. He's also an author, editor, and ghostwriter of 15 books, including prize winners and international bestsellers. He's also taught novel writing for over a decade at Falmouth University and Faber Academy, to name a few. Tom, welcome. How are you today?
Very good. Yes, it's lovely to be here, and thank you everyone for kind of tuning in. It's great to see so many of you and from all around the world. It's always exciting to be so many people interested in writing and writing fiction. So yeah, thank you for joining, and I hope I can offer some useful advice and tips over the next hour or so.
Yeah, we're very excited to have you here. Tom has kindly agreed to kind of open up his virtual office door to answer all your questions about the course, creative writing, getting published, and anything else that you're wondering about. And I thought we'd kind of divide up these questions into 3 different sections on writing, editing, and getting published. And we'll kick things off with questions about writing. So if you have any questions related to this topic, go ahead and post those in the comment section, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible before the hour is up. And yeah, while we kind of wait for your questions to come in, I thought I'd ask Tom just a couple questions about his own novel writing journey and how he kind of got started. So yeah, Tom, do you want to maybe start us off just by telling us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got a slightly odd background because I guess I've been a published author. I'm a ghostwriter. I obviously kind of teach writing. I've been an editor and a publisher, so I've sort of seen the process from all sides. But it sort of started with writing for me, and that actually came in a sort of tangential way. So when I was a teenager, when I was at college, I used to play in bands. So that was my dream, was to be a rock star. And the bands I were in kind of almost made it, but didn't quite make it. And it might not surprise you to learn that I was the least rock and roll member in the band. So everybody else used to get up about midday and would rehearse in the afternoon, and I'm a morning person. So I used that time to start writing. That's when I experimented. And when the band split up, I sort of carried on with a novel that I was writing, and that became my first book. So I wasn't someone who wanted to be a writer from birth. That was something I sort of came into, but I think doing the music and writing the songs and writing the lyrics and everything all fed into the writing. So it was in that period after the band split up, really, where I sort of learned how to write. And that first novel I wrote, it took about 5 years. I wrote about sort of 5 drafts, and I was fitting in around other things I was doing, but that became the kind of first novel that got published.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for kind of telling us a little bit about that. I think that's really kind of interesting to hear. I think everyone kind of has their own, way of getting started, and different ways of kind of starting that, both the writing and the publishing journey. And yeah, you told us a little bit there about kind of how you got started with writing, and I kind of have been writing and teaching fiction for a number of years now. What do you think the biggest kind of misconception is about writing fiction?
I think one of them for me is that there's a sort of formula or a way on how to write. I know that there's lots of kind of how-to books out there, particularly when it comes to kind of structure and plot. And it's very easy to think that you can just plug your story into one of these books and into one of these formulas, and out will pop a book. And actually, for me, I think writing is more about learning the craft, learning the principles, learning who you are as a writer. I mean, one of the things I know from teaching people writing is how different everybody is. And I think sometimes we talk about this idea of in a book, you need to kind of find your voice. And I think that's certainly true, but also you need to find your voice as a writer. You need to learn who you are as a writer and learn to trust your instincts rather than feeling that there's a quick shortcut that, one of these how-to books will kind of tell you how to do it. And so when I teach the course, I try and teach from first principles principles really. So give people the basics and the craft techniques, and then they can go away and adapt and kind of use for their own kind of purposes. And for me, that's what writing is about. It's the individuality and helping people to kind of bring that out, which I think is the key to writing good fiction.
Amazing. Well, I'm seeing loads of questions coming in already, so I think we'll kind of dive into questions about writing. We've got on here from Priscilla, who asks, how do I write an opening chapter that hooks my readers?
That is a good question. I always think that the secret to the start of a novel, I always think, is answering that question: why now? Why are we dropping the reader in at this particular moment? I think for me that is key. If the book is too slow and it takes 3 chapters for the beginning to kind of take off properly, you're going to lose the reader before it gets there. I think by the end of that opening chapter, you should be sufficiently rounded that you've got a sense of the protagonist, you've got a sense of the story, perhaps a sense of the setting, and also in an important but quieter way, perhaps a sense of the voice as well. So when I talk to publishers and agents and I ask what they look for when they're looking at submissions, they always tell me that voice is the thing that they're particularly looking out for. So if you get a sense of that and capture that in the opening pages, I think that's really, really important. And the other thing I would add as well is just think about the demands of your genre as well. So, for example, there's a a familiar trope in crime fiction. If you're writing a crime novel, you need your body by the end of chapter 1. So think about the demands of the particular genre you're writing in as well. But I think for me, really, that crucial question of why now is the starting point that will helpfully get you going and get the story up and running as quickly as possible.
I think that's a really good tip. And yeah, we've got another one here from Katie that's kind of related to also starting out, but she's asking a little bit more about outlining novels. So do you start a novel with an outline? And if so, what kind of outline do you recommend? How do you then build it out? And what elements must be there before you kind of get started with drafting?
Again, I think it's different for every writer rather than there being kind of one particular way of doing this. So we sometimes talk about this debate between whether you're a planner or a pantser, and by a pantser I mean that you're sort of flying by the seat of your pants. You're not doing any kind of prep at all, and most people are not at one of those extremes, but sort of somewhere along that kind of sliding scale. And I think it's working out where on that scale you feel comfortable writing. So sometimes you want to have stuff planned, so then you've got that security there. Sometimes you don't want the planning because you want that freedom to explore and see where the book goes. For me, I tend to have quite loose outlines. So I've got a sort of idea of the overall kind of story arc. I know where it's going to end. So I know sort of the direction of travel, but I don't quite know how it's going to get there. So I want to give that little wiggle room to explore and see where the story could go. Because I find that exciting when I write. If I know everything that's going to happen, I think that you write in a slightly different way. But I know other writers who will write enormously detailed plots and structures before they start. So my sort of unhelpful answer is it's different for everybody. So work out how much planning you need to do for yourself is probably the best answer. The other thing I would add as well, that if you are kind of plotting and structuring, actually I think some of the key work to do in advance is actually more thinking about the characters and the protagonist in particular. I would focus possibly a little bit more on character and a little bit less on plot than you might be expecting, and that will help you stand you in good stead.
That sounds good. Speaking of characters or developing characters, we have on here from Stevie. He's wondering, what do you find is the key to developing compelling dynamic characters and not just protagonists?
I mean, different characters are different in the book. So I think for the central characters, I think one of the key things is kind of motivation. What do they want? What do they need? Think about that sort of journey of change that they're going to go on. How are they going to be a different person at the end of the book to how they are at the beginning? Sometimes we talk about sort of fat and thin characters, by which I mean, kind of rounded characters, and then characters who are kind of small and come in scene by scene. And if you're writing kind of lesser characters, having something distinctive that kind of grabs the reader and makes them immediately recognizable, I think is kind of really, really useful. But generally, I think it's finding some some spark or tension within them. So quite often when we talk about plot, we talk about dramatic tension. I think the same is true with characters. You want a couple of attributes of that character that kind of rub up against each other the wrong way, and that creates a little spark and a little bit of tension. And I think that when you get that, that's usually when those characters kind of come alive. And I think when you're planning and developing characters, it's not doing those sort of character checklists of all that detail about where they went to school and what shoe size they are, but like small little incidental details, and that's the way you can build up a picture of a character extremely effectively.
That's good. We have a few questions here coming in about point of view. Laurie here is wondering if you could talk just a little bit about point of view and also, about the different trends and what they are in various genres.
Point of view has sort of changed over the years. I think at the moment in publishing, the majority of the books are in either two kinds of viewpoints. So either they're written in first person, or they're written in what's described as third person close. So third person close is where you're following the action from the viewpoint of one particular character, almost like a sort of parrot on the shoulder. So you're with that character and seeing their world, but you're not sort of in their voice in the way you are as third person. I think that's the use of first person has grown over the last 10-15 years. I think that's come particularly through the growth of YA and psychological thrillers as kind of new genres, both of which demand or tend to have first person narratives as their driving force. I don't know whether that will stay, or whether this will be a sort of fad and in 20 years' time it will have shifted again. But I think the two things I always say with viewpoint is people worry about which viewpoint they should tell their story from. And I think the two key questions are, firstly, what are the demands of the story? Which is the best way to tell that particular story? And secondly, what do you feel comfortable in writing in as a writer? There's no point thinking, well, I must write first person and you're a third person. And I often suggest to writers towards the start of the writing journey to try and write a section in one viewpoint and then rewrite it in a different viewpoint and see which one works better for that story, because that's really the key. Is what is the story you're trying to tell, and which viewpoint is the best way to tell that story, rather than thinking I'm going to do something clever by writing this book in second person or something. I would say. And I think with the other thing I would just mention very briefly about point of view is the importance of consistency. So whatever viewpoint you choose, stick to those rules rigidly, otherwise you trip the reader up.
That's good. You mentioned a little bit there about kind of picking the viewpoint that you're most comfortable with, and also the one that kind of fits the story the best. Lisa here has a question about a book that she's writing. She says her heroine is her protagonist, and she feels more comfortable kind of writing from a female point of view, or her hero's character development is better or bigger. What would you suggest in that situation?
I mean, my immediate thought on that would be that maybe that's a book where you're going to tell the story from both those characters' points of views. It might be a dual narrative, and maybe there's a way to kind of interlace between the two strands. I mean, it depends a little bit on what the story is telling, or it might be that the heroine works as a more narrative kind of figure, so she's the one kind of driving the telling of the story, and she can tell the story of the hero's character, and that might be another way around. I would play around a little bit, I think, but sometimes the most interesting books are where you have different chapters from different viewpoints rather than just kind of settling on one in particular, and that might be the way to go here.
That's good. What about when it kind of comes to picking different genres? So we have a few questions here about genres. We've got one. So Gwyneth here, for example, she's asking, oh, sorry, I've just lost Gwyneth's comment. But yeah, she's asking, how would you classify a book that position kind of at late teens or readers in their early 20s, and it's set in high school but it feels kind of older than YA? So basically, how do you decide whether to classify a book as YA versus adult?
I wouldn't worry about it in the first instance, would be the first thing I would say. I think when you're writing, you just need to write the book that you want to write rather than thinking where it's going to end up in the marketplace. I think when you do that, it tends to inhibit you a little bit and kind of restricts you as a writer. So the first thing I always say is give yourself the freedom to write the book first and then worry about this kind of later on. If you're going down the traditional route, this would be, if you're approaching an agent would be able to help and advise here rather than you feeling you have to make this kind of decision. And that would generally be a decision either for the agent and then also the publisher would have a decision as well. I mean, my suspicion is, and generally my understanding, if you're writing books either for kind of teenagers or kind of YA or kind of young adult or kind of early 20s, an early 20s audience, is that people tend to read up by a couple of years. So if you're writing a book and the protagonists are 15, then that's probably going to be read by people who are a little bit younger. If you're reading a book and the characters are 17, then the readers are going to be predominantly a little bit younger again. So I would say if you've got a book that's set in high school, that's going to be read by a younger audience primarily, unless it's done in a more kind of adult way, in which case it's not going to be aimed at early 20s in particular, but a general kind of wider audience. And that's usually, it would work well for that group depending on if the themes are more adult in the book. I think YA tends to have, more specific themes that the books are kind of written around in terms of that sense of experience and growing. So adult wise, it would feel slightly different, but it's a slightly waffly answer, I'm afraid. But I think that the nub of it, I would say, is to not worry about it when you're writing. Don't worry about genre at this point. Write the book that you want to write and worry about where it will sit in the bookshop later on.
That sounds like good advice to kind of help you focus in on that writing stage. We have another question here on something we haven't touched on yet, which is pacing in a story. So how can you improve pacing? And then a second question there also on dialogue. How do you make dialogue more natural?
Pacing is, I think when you're writing, a lot of pacing done is in the rewriting. Actually, I think when you go back through and redraft, that's when you can read it, read the manuscript in full, and see which bits feel fast and which bits feel slow. And over the book, you want that pace to change. You don't want it the same pace throughout. I think that's the first thing to say on it. If you want to speed things up, shorter chapters generally work, and think about kind of shortening sentences and shortening paragraphs will all add kind of impetus to the narrative. Use of dialogue definitely helps as well. So as a general rule, I would say that description tends to slow a narrative down and dialogue speeds it up. So if you're wanting to speed a book up, think about increasing the amount of use of dialogue in there. On the writing course, we do a week on what we call texture, where we look about mixing up the balance between these different kind of writing elements. And on that second question, on making the dialogue more natural, I think the biggest piece of advice I always give to everyone about dialogue is read it out loud. I think that's the quickest and easiest way to see whether the dialogue feels real or not. If you're reading it and it sounds a mouthful, then that's probably a bit too wordy and not how people normally speak. And don't be afraid when you're writing dialogue to write in incomplete sentences. You'll if you listen, if you did a transcript of how I'm talking right now, it would be kind of all over the shop and not kind of grammatically correct. But that's how people talk. So don't feel you have to follow grammatical rules when you're writing dialogue, but definitely reading it out, I would say, is a really, really useful and helpful technique to get into.
That's a great tip, yeah. We have a few questions here on kind of world building and setting. So John here, for example, asks, all else being equal, would you rather a story is set in a fictional land or a real place? I'd rather it set in a place where the world is well written and well described. I think both can work kind of equally well. I think sometimes when you're writing in real places, there's that frisson, particularly if you know the place and there's like an authenticity there. Sometimes in a fictional world, you have that freedom to kind of create something new, and there's an excitement there. So actually,
I think it depends on the writing really, and depends on the book. And I think, I mean, I guess if you're writing science fiction or you're writing fantasy, then you're going to be writing about a fictional element. You don't have a choice. If you're writing a crime novel, perhaps, then you might want to set it in a fictional town rather than a real town. And I always think there's advantages and disadvantages to both of them. I remember interviewing one author who was really careful of, he was setting the book in his hometown and he didn't want to annoy the local restaurants by being kind of rude about them. So he sort of gave himself some space by inventing places within the town that he could be rude about rather than directly choosing places that existed. But I think a sort of balance of the two can work as well. But yeah, I think I would more focus on the quality of the description, and either can work. It depends on probably the particular story that you're writing. But yeah, either could work extremely well.
I think that makes sense, yeah. If you are creating a world that is kind of like a fantasy world, which I assume is what this question is referring to, Sam here asks, how do you rein in the world of a book to limit scope and avoid kitchen sinking?
That's a good question. Well, I think if you're creating a fantasy world, you've got more work to do. If you're setting a novel in contemporary London, it's quite easy to kind of set the scene, because you're not having to do that sort of increased world. I think the challenge with it probably is not to add too much kind of craziness in there. I would say the first thing, I think you can have an amazing, fantastic world with a few things happening rather than too many things happening. The other thing to think about is how you get that information across to the reader. And if your world is too different and too complicated, then you're going to slow the story down because you're going to have to give the reader all this exposition and description and understanding of what the place is. So actually, I think the key thing probably is in the telling and how you get that information across. So I'd probably, build out, use when you're writing description, use the different senses that the reader can relate to. I think that's a really useful and interesting way to kind of get the reader in and understand. But yeah, think about how you're getting that information over, because if you have a chapter one and it's all just explanation of what's going on in this world, and that's going to slow the reader right down at the start when you're wanting them to kind of get excited about the story. So I think thinking about how you get that information in, I think is kind of really, really important.
Yeah, we're going to switch here a little bit because I see lots of questions coming in on other topics. We've got one here on prologues and epilogues. So, what's your kind of general opinion on those two?
I'm prologue neutral. I think, and I know that there are some writers who absolutely, believe that you should never have a prologue and you should go straight into chapter one. For me, it depends on the demands of the particular story. I think the danger with prologues is that you end up having two chapter ones. So if there's too much plotty stuff happening in the prologue, or it's too long, then you get the chapter one again, and that sort of slows the story down. So if you've got a prologue, it should be almost like an hors d'oeuvre. It should give you a taste or a flavour of what is to come. But some prologues can be kind of really, really really, really successful. I would keep them short. I wouldn't worry too much of them about the beginning. I would probably write the book proper first, and then once you've got a draft there, read it as a whole, and then you can see whether the novel would benefit from having a prologue or not. There was a story about C.J. Sansom, who died quite recently, and one of his books has just been turned into a TV series, which I think was the first of these books. So they're kind of crime mysteries set in monasteries. And the first book, he had this back and forth with his group of writer friends about whether he should have a prologue or not. And I think in the end, he wanted it, and then it was taken out, and then he was persuaded to add it in, and then it was taken out, and then when they did the TV series, they've added it back in again. So it shows you there's no one right answer to this. It kind of, different people have different opinions. But yeah, go back to the demands of the story. And epilogues, I think, are fine. I think by that point, once the book is resolved, you've got space to have a little bit extra going on. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But these are extra details to think about later on, rather than feeling something you've got to get right at the beginning before you start the book proper.
Yeah, I remember when that story came out, and it's funny how so many people can be involved and have totally different opinions on something like that. So,
Yeah, and they were all good. He's got a good editor, he's got a good agent, and the writing group he had in, I think it was Brighton, I think, were all kind of published authors. So they all knew what they were talking about, but everyone had kind of diametrically opposed opinions. It was like 50-50 whether this prologue should be there or not,
yeah.
which just goes to show that there's no one right answer to this at all.
You spoke a little bit before about voice, and we have a question here on how do you actually go about finding your own unique voice?
I think, I think sometimes that phrase "finding your voice" is a little bit misleading. I think it's more about bringing it out. I think is the key. There's So on the course we do a session and we look at some readings by Raymond Carver and Murakami, I think in particular, who are brilliant on this. And it's about capturing a mixture of things. It's a sort of it's a worldview. It's the way that you write. It's a kind of sense of humour. It's opinions. It's lots of little things together that combine. There's a wonderful essay by Raymond Carver called On Writing in a book called Fires, where he talks about this kind of brilliantly. So it's sort of giving yourself the space to breathe. I think it's important. It's not like a search and you kind of find something to kind of tack on top of what it is you're doing. It tends to be a thinning out in the way that you'd have someone who sculpts, kind of carving the sculpture out of the kind of the rock. It's more that kind of process of bringing it out and having the confidence to do that, I would say. And it doesn't need to be flashy or showy at all. There's a phrase by Raymond Carver from this essay where he says, it's something about a writer that has a unique way of looking at the world is one who's going to go far. And I think that's absolutely right. And if you're writing about the ordinary and the everyday, but you're doing it in a different and interesting way, then you're doing well, I would say.
That's a really nice way of looking at it. Yeah, we have a question here from Kaylee. So she asks, how do you balance everyday life and your writing?
Uh, with difficulty. I think I think you have to carve out the time to write, and I think one of the challenges in writing is that it tends to be the thing that goes because other demands come in. So absolutely, kind of ring fencing that time. On the writing course, we have an authors panel, and I asked them about when they wrote, and it was interesting the number of writers who get up early in the morning before like the house is up and the day begins. So they have this time at I think one started at 7 and one started at 6 and one got up at 5. It was all, everyone was getting earlier and earlier, but they have that kind of time to themselves. I think finding that space and ring fencing that is crucial. But I think when you're working on a book, then I find particularly when you're heading towards a deadline, it is all consuming, and I think my family know that. So you're going to be up early and up late working through, and so the balance goes out at that time, and then you have to kind of reset the balance afterwards. I would love to be one of those writers who just wrote, 1,000 words a day, and so many months later out popped a book. I tend to be all over the shop. So yeah, I'm not possibly the best person to answer that because I think I'm slightly imbalanced in different places.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to to get the balance right. All right, we've got one more question here on writing before we kind of switch gears. I think this one's come up a few times as well. Stevie asks, do you have any tips for combating writer's block?
Yeah, I think the main thing, I mean, is not to put too much pressure on you. I mean, I know sometimes when I've had people on courses and they've got through and then they've got stuck and then they kind of worry that they're going to get behind with the word count. And I think when you give yourself a hard time, then you're making it even harder for yourself. So I tend to find if the writing's not happening, or it's not working, I'll go and do something different. So I might go and read. I might think I'm going to do some editing. I also think just something fairly straightforward like going for a walk can really help as well. I think there's something about excuse me, being sat in front of a screen with a blank page and not sure where to start. It's all quite static. If you get up and go for a walk, that quite often is where the ideas will kind of come and will generate. So I would try and change things up a little bit. I tend to find with writing that I try over the course of the book, we'll write in different places. So sometimes I'll start in my office, and then I'll find actually I'm working better on the kitchen table for a bit, or I'll change and use different music. Something to keep it different and changing. But you will have periods both ways around. You'll have periods where it feels like it's like getting blood out of a stone to write, and other periods when the taps are open. And when the taps are open, the words are coming out. Get as much down as you can at that particular point. And as I said, I think you have some writers who will write, absolutely regularly, the same word count every day. But for the rest of us, it's a bit more up and down. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself in those moments when you happen. All things must pass, as George Harrison once sang. So I'd remember that too.
It's a good reminder on the days when the writing isn't coming.
Yeah, and we all have them, and any writer who says they don't have them is lying, I think.
Cool. Well, we're going to move on to questions about editing in just a few minutes. So yeah, if you have questions about editing or anything to do with the editing stage, feel free to start sending those through to the chat. But before we kind of get on to more questions, Tom is going to briefly just tell you a little bit more about his 3-month How to Write a Novel course. So as part of this course, you get access to daily masterclasses, exclusive webinars, as well as a friendly community where you can chat to Tom and other writers on the course, and also get feedback on your writing. And Tom, do you want to tell us just a little bit about the course and also how you kind of went about designing it?
Yeah, so I've been teaching, or we've been running the How to Write a Novel course for about just over a year now, and the idea behind the course is sort of a distillation. I mean, I've taught novel writing for over a decade, and wanted to pull together all the different teachings I'd done into one particular course. I spent about 6 months kind of writing the course, and what we've come up is a sort of 3-month course, and the idea is that we want you to write a full first draft over the course of those kind of 15 weeks, and we do this in a couple of ways. So it's taught through excuse me, a mixture of daily lessons. So every day, Monday to Saturday, you get a new lesson on a different kind of writing theme, and these are done on different themes, kind of week to week. At the same time, we're kind of asking you to kind of work on your novel. As you can see up on the screen here, a list of the different themes that we look at. They're sort of structured as a little bit like a novel. So we look at beginnings at the beginning, middles in the middle, and sort of endings towards the end. The first half are more kind of core kind of writing skills, and the second are slightly more developed ones. But I've tried to kind of balance it. So think of it a little bit. I sometimes describe the course as NaNoWriMo meets masterclass. So you've got that space to write and get the text down, but also you're learning how to write at the same time. And we've got these daily videos to kind of plug you in and keep you writing. And then, as Felicia was saying, we have a community, so you have the option to kind of get feedback each week on your work from other writers in the group. And I host a live session each Monday, and sometimes these sessions are masterclasses on a particular writing topic. Some of them I do kind of live editing sessions, as some of you may have seen as I run, and we also have a number of guest authors on the Mondays as well. And you can see on the screen here, these are just a few examples of some of the authors we've had over the last kind of few months. I think it's really, really useful to kind of hear from writers who are getting published at the moment, learn about how they got published, and have the opportunity to ask them questions about their work and about writing. So that's a big part of the course for me. We've had some fantastic writers, and we try to get a mix of writers from all different genres as we go through. So yeah, I'm really excited about the course. We've had I think about 8 or 9 cohorts through, and it's always pleasing when we get writers who get to the end and they have completed that draft. I know it's not an easy thing to do for having done it myself, but to get that draft down and then be able to have something to work with, I think is invaluable. And I think being able to do that in a safe space, in a group that's supporting you and encouraging you, is a really good way to write, and hopefully will launch you off on your kind of writing careers. I think we've got a couple more slides. Yeah, so just a little bit of detail about it. So the course fee at the moment is $1,249, although there is a discount code if you wait until the end that brings that down just under the $1,000 mark. I appreciate it's a reasonable amount of money. I always say to students here that there are Certainly the comparable courses I think tend to be more expensive. We tend to be about half the price of those, and you get a lot of content for the course. You're getting about 25 hours worth of videos. You've got the live sessions. You've got the access to the community. I think it is good value. And if you're serious about wanting to be a writer, I think it's a really, really invaluable investment for you. And as you can see there, we've got courses beginning at the beginning of September and then in October as well. And in that, don't take my word for it, Way. I think there's a couple of testimonials from previous students as well. Yes, very, very, very kind words on those, which is always kind of pleasing to hear. But yeah, we've had lots of really positive feedback on the course, and I would hope that if you're interested in taking the course, that you would enjoy it and find it useful as well.
All right, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about that. It's always great to kind of see what other people have said, and yeah, it's been great to kind of hear how everyone who's kind of taken the course is taking something a little bit different away from it. And yeah, I hope if you guys enroll as well, you'll learn lots of great things from Tom. But yeah, we're going to be talking about editing now. I'm already seeing loads of great questions coming in about editing. To kind of start things off, we've got on here from Brooke, who asks, how do you find an editor and when exactly do you do it in the writing process?
I think there's this is probably different kinds of editors depending on where you are in your sort of writing journey. So I think earlier on, the kind of editor you're probably looking for is someone who might be a coach, an editing coach, or who might mentor you, who might offer a sort of manuscript assessment. So the first thing I would say probably is the first point to think about having an editor is when you've got a full draft down. And I know that we've got some students who finish the course and then they will go and sign up and get an editor to have a manuscript read and assessment and then do the rewrites on the back of that. The other kind of editor really is when they're going to get stuck into the manuscript and kind of copy edit and structurally edit the book. And that's for further down the line. I think for me, you don't need to spend money on editing kind of straight away. And certainly if you're submitting to an agent or a publisher, they would rather see the work that you can do rather than have it professionally edited before you submit there. If you're thinking about self-publishing, then you would be looking at kind of getting an editor to kind of copy edit and work on the script. But I always advise people that the key thing really is to get reads. So if you've got a community of writers, whether it's on a course or elsewhere, get the feedback from your beta readers, pull those comments and do the rewrites on the back of that. That will give you the lot of stuff that you need that a professional editor would give you anyway. So you don't need to spend that money necessarily. But for those moments when you do want comments and feedback and editors, the REEDSY'S marketplace I would obviously endorse as one place where there's a lot of fantastic editors you could find and could use for your editing requirements.
That's great, yeah, and we'll include the links to all of those things in the kind of comment section or the video description. If you haven't checked out the marketplace before, it's at reedsy.com. We've got so many questions here coming in about editing. I know you speak a little bit about this on your course, but Amanda here asks, do you edit as you go or do you write a complete draft and then edit?
Write a complete draft. So actually, I do always say to the students, my advice is never go back. I think once you start, you need to get through to the end, unless there's something where the plot changes so fundamentally there's no point continuing. I would push on and get that full first draft down, because if you find that you're rewriting that first chapter, then you lose all momentum, and those are the people I found who never actually finished the draft in the first place. And once you've got a whole draft, you can actually see the bigger picture stuff in a way that you can't on a chapter plan or whatever. So my advice would be very much to kind of go through, get to the end, and then go back and do the rewrites, and then you can do them in a bigger picture way, and then do the editing a second. So give yourself the space and the freedom to write in the first instance, and come back and kind of make changes later on. Is my advice, and I think that's true for most writers. I know there are some writers who will go back and tweak as they go, but I would personally encourage you to resist that urge and keep writing.
And when it kind of comes to starting the revision process, do you have any advice for that stage? Laura here says she has a second draft that needs to be overhauled and she's struggling with getting traction on that process. Thanks in advance.
Yeah, and thank you, Laura. I think it's a really good question. I mean, the first thing I always say when you're wanting to go back and edit is to give yourself the space. So I would put the manuscript in a drawer for at least a month or kind of 6 weeks, and then read it afresh. I think when you do that, then you're going to have a little more space and distance and be able to see it more clearly. One writer I worked with, who I have taught with in the past, always prints their manuscripts out in a different font to the one they wrote in, because they think that when they do that, then they can kind of see things in a slightly different way. Certainly, I would do it in a different way. I mean, there's a phrase of, write on screen, edit on the page. I think seeing it in a different way, I think, is kind of really really useful. And I think I would read as a reader first. So read the whole script, think about the bigger picture stuff first, think about the plot and the characters. Are they working? Think about the pacing, which bits feel fast, which bits feel slow. Get the furniture in the right place first, and then get down to kind of the smaller details after that. Is the way I would approach. But I think that first bit is key to give yourself that space to come back. And I think don't be afraid to make big changes. So I've been working on a novel recently, and actually the I'd written, yeah, so same as you actually, Laura. I'd written two drafts of it, and then I realised after that actually what I think I'd written was the middle third of a longer book, and actually that 90,000 words needed to come down into about sort of 30,000 words and have a sort of different beginning and ending. So that was quite a big shift and a big change. So don't be afraid to change things. It can make a big difference.
I think that's really great to hear, like how other people kind of work through that process as well. And yeah, we have some questions here coming in specifically about the course. Susan here asks, is your course more geared towards writers who are writing their first draft, or would it work for someone who's working on draft 2?
I think it's more geared towards writers who are working on the first draft. Although we have had people who've come in and then used it and then used the teaching to kind of go back and kind of rewrite and redraft as they go through. But yeah, I think ideally you come with a new idea and you kind of push through. But yeah, there's no reason at all why you can't use it for a second draft. I think you might find that you get the most benefit out of the course if you're starting something fresh rather than coming with a manuscript already finished.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see it. Obviously, we kind of recommend people coming in with a fresh idea. But as you said, we've also had some people who kind of go in and use it, or even people who kind of have taken the course once and then have gone back to take it again a second time as they got into draft 2.
Yeah, and I think there's something about the course and being in a group that gives you the discipline to do it. I think sometimes that, where you've got those deadlines, you've got that focus, you've got the feedbacking each week, and that forces you to get on and do it. So I think some people like to work in that atmosphere. So if that feels like that would be encouraging and helpful for you with the writing, then I would definitely, have a think about taking part.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit here also about beta readers. V here asks, when do you go and find a beta reader, and is the first draft good enough? At what stage do you kind of involve other readers?
Again, it's a little different for different people. My always starting point with beta readers is other writers. So if in the feedbacking on the course, we pair people up with different writers each week. There's something about writing and getting read by someone who's at the same point in the process that is really useful. It helps them to understand, or be more sympathetic, I think, to where you're at as a writer. But generally, fellow writers are always good starting points, or people who who are really good readers. I tend to avoid, kind of good friends or family, because either they're sort of over nice because they don't want to offend you, or they're kind of really harsh, and that's a bit unhelpful. So finding someone whose opinion you trust, I think is really, really useful. That question, is the first draft good enough? I suppose, does that mean is the first draft good enough to get a beta reader? It depends on the first draft, and it depends when it's useful for you to get feedback. So what I tend to do is I would rather complete a draft first and then get it into a shape when I feel comfortable showing it to people. So with this current book I'm working on, I think when I finished the first draft, I did do a bit of minor editing on it, but then gave it to half a dozen people to read at that point, and got feedback, and then that fed into how I wrote the second draft. But I didn't show it to anybody. In fact, I'm quite private in that way. I didn't discuss what the book was about at all with anyone until I'd completed the draft. But other people are different. Some people like to have feedback as they go along. And finding either a course where you can find fellow writers or finding kind of writers groups, either online or offline, is a really, really useful way of finding kind of beta readers.
That's a good point, that everyone kind of think or approaches that slightly differently. Some people want lots of feedback early on. Some people don't want to show it to anyone until it's in a very polished state.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I was just going to add that there's so much of the teaching, and I think the more I do this, it's working out what works for you is so important. There are no steadfast rules. There's so much with writing. It's working out, who you are, what you need, what will help you, and finding that for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think we have time for one more question on editing. So yeah, if you have any questions on publishing, querying, anything like that, start getting those questions in. And we'll have one more question here from Sam. He asks, I feel like every time I go back and read my draft, I find tons of little nits to pick, but I also find major changes I can make to improve the story. How do I know when I should stop?
There was there's going back to Raymond Carver though. There's a quote where he said that you knew a story was pretty much ready when you'd gone through and took all the commas out and you went back and started putting them back in again. There's never a kind of end point really. I think you just have to let go of your baby out into the world at some point. I think you. For me, I tend to find that when you feel you've done as much as you can on a script, and this is as good as you can do at that particular moment. And then I think it's getting feedback from people. Certainly when I've worked on scripts, kind of showing them showing to my editor or my agent, and they will tell you, that's pretty much good to go, or this is going to need another kind of serious go through before, going further. So I think get it to a point where you feel that this is as good as you can do, and then get feedback from other people to see whether they feel this is, this is okay and just needs a little bit of minor tweaking, or if it needs something more fundamental. But you could go back and rewrite forever. I think even going back to books that I've had published, if I reread my first book now, I would quite easily go back and think, okay, well, there's much more I could do here. But at that point of time, as a writer, that was the best I could do. So that was, that was a good point to leave it, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. All right, well, let's go on to some questions about publishing. And we have a few here coming in already. Rennie here asks, how do we rise above the slush pile?
The slush pile is a challenge. You're going to be, if you're trying to get an editor or an agent, you're going to be one of many. So I think the first thing I would say is don't have a kind of, you need to sort of develop a kind of thick skin about it, because you are going to get rejections. And I think with the first book that I wrote, I've still got all the letters. I think I've got about sort of 25 or 26 rejection letters I had before somebody took it on. So I wouldn't worry about that. I think you need to remember that as a writer, or as an agent, I would say they're looking at the book from a business perspective. So they are thinking, can I sell this? So if they're rejecting the book, it's nothing personal about you as a writer or about you as in terms of the quality of your writing. It's more thinking, can they sell this? So you treat it in a sort of dispassionate business way as they're treating it. I think it's quite hard to avoid. The ways round is to make contacts. So whether you're going to writers' conferences, getting one-to-ones with different agents and kind of making links there, kind of following agents on kind of social media, trying to find some kind of connection there kind of definitely helps. I think when I started, the agent I got, I did an MA in creative writing, which is the UK equivalent of an MFA, and the agents came to the course. And so I got the agent. He was one of the agents who came to the course. That's where he came. But you can put yourself, in a position where you could meet agents and ask them there. I think that can help. But if your book is good enough, it will make it through. I do believe that the system kind of generally works. But a good covering letter, a good synopsis, and a good first page are all absolutely crucial. But everything does get read. I do know that, having worked at literary agents myself, that everything will be looked at. But making sure you got your best foot forward, I think is definitely helpful.
Yeah, that sounds good. And kind of speaking of putting your best foot forward, Anna here asks how much editing should be done to the final draft before reaching out to an agent or sending a query letter?
I mean, I think when you're sending it out to an agent, you've got sort of one shot. So you want the book to be as good as it's possible to be, or as good as you feel you can do it, because they are not going to say, "Oh, I quite like it, but can you give it another go and send it back again?" If they've rejected it once, they're sort of not interested. So get it to a good position. As I said earlier, I don't think you need to get it professionally edited. I don't think that's crucial, but make sure it's ready. I think one of the things that I know that agents don't like is when you send off a couple of chapters and that's all you've written, and they say, "Oh, that's great. Can you send me the whole thing?" And then you go, "Well, actually, I haven't written it. I'm gonna, and then you come back sort of 2 years later when you've written the book. By which point they've forgotten about you, or they've already signed another author who's a bit like you, or they're doing something else completely. So you need to be able, if you're querying, you need to have that manuscript ready to go. I wouldn't be thinking about sending off stuff until you've got a whole script written. I know it's tempting to fire it off and see what happens, but I would wait until you've got a script there. And as I say, I don't think you need to get it professional edited, but certainly I would have it, beta read and have had feedback and that kind of level of stuff before you go out sending it to agents.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to kind of have it all ready to go. And as you said, kind of put your best foot forward. We have kind of a question here. I guess it relates to publishing in the sense that it's kind of what comes later on in the process. But do you have any tips for avoiding spoilers in a blurb?
So my first job in publishing many years ago, I was a blurb writer. So I worked for Little Brown, and I wrote all the blurbs on the back of the books. It was a lovely job. You used to go in the morning and you'd read the new manuscript by Patricia Cornwall, whoever it was at the time, and then you would kind of summarise the book. I think that the key thing really is, readers hate stuff being given away in a blurb. So you're usually writing not about the whole story, but probably around the first third, possibly the first half, but kind of no further, and leave that sort of, that sort of dot 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 to leave things hanging. But try and keep it more around what is happening towards the start of the book would be my kind of main kind of recommendation, and try not to put too much in. I think one of the secrets with blurbs is they don't need to be long. So the rule when I was doing paperbacks was that they had to be 100 to 150 words maximum, which actually doesn't give you much space to talk about plot. I think if you can set up the premise of the story, give a sense of where it is, give a sense of the characters, give a sense of what the book is like, which other readers, which other writers are similar. I think that's more than enough to kind of keep people going. But yeah, I don't like blurbs that give away too much stuff about the story. So yeah, I would keep keep it to the minimum. And actually, just on a similar point, sometimes with synopses, because agents are readers and they want to read the book, don't feel you have to give away the whole plot in a synopsis. I know some agents absolutely hate that if they're reading a murder mystery and they read the synopsis and they find out who the killer is. They would much rather read the book and experience the book as a reader would themselves. So if you're writing a synopsis, also kind of bear that in mind too, that you don't have to put everything down in the synopsis in the covering letter.
That's a great tip. And yeah, I totally agree that as a reader, it's nice to kind of have a little bit of a hint of what is to come, but not to have too many spoilers. Um,
Exactly.
yeah. I don't know if you can maybe speak a little bit about word counts, especially when it comes to words counts as a new author. So Jen here asks, how can we pitch a high word count book as a new novelist? And is it better to split the book to make it shorter and more marketable and try for a series?
I think it's changed. It's changed a little bit over the years. And the other thing I would say is it probably depends on which genre you're writing in. So, for example, if you're writing a fantasy series, actually, quite often those books are quite long, and that's and that's more kind of expected. I do know that there's some agents I know won't look at manuscripts over 120,000 words in length. They have a kind of maximum that they will look at. I think the thing to remember with long books is the cost of printing them. So once books are over a certain length, then they're really expensive to publish. So then, unless it's exceptionally good, then it's a harder sell to a publisher. And in a similar way, if a book's too short, then it doesn't really kind of work kind of financially either, which is one of the reasons why books tend to fall in this middle way. That's changed a little bit over the last 10, 15 years with the kind of rise of ebooks, where obviously the page length doesn't matter at all, and then you can do books any kind of length you want. I think it depends on the story. I think Jan. I think it's hard to be too prescriptive without knowing the story. I think if you're writing a fantasy series, then there is scope for the books to be long if the writing is good. But also, editors and publishers like series, because if you've got a repeat book and repeat business, that can work kind of really, really well as well. I would say most debut novels tend to come in between 80 and 100,000 words. So if it's going to be significantly higher than that, just be aware of that fact as you're writing it, and think about that accordingly. But I think it would depend a little bit on the story rather than kind of artificially cutting the book in two, because you think that's what the publishing world would demand.
Yeah, I think that absolutely makes sense. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions here. I don't know if there's a right answer to this, but Heather here asks, how many agents do you apply to before you scrap a novel and write a different one?
So as I was saying, I think I probably wrote to about 25 or so. I remember that the writer Tibor Fischer, whose first novel Under the Frog was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, I think from memory, he wrote to 49 agents who rejected it, and then the 50th took him on, and then it was published, and then he was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. So you don't know is the short answer. I think it partly depends how much stamina you've got. I mean, my normal advice with sending stuff out is I would send it to agents in batches, so maybe half a dozen at a time. If you're getting the same feedback again and again and again, then if that might be a sign that this is the right time to kind of pause it and kind of try something else. But there's lots of stories of writers who tried and tried and tried. I mean, John Kennedy Toole, The Confederacy of Dunces, has a kind of amazing story where he couldn't get it published at all, and actually after his death, his mother kind of took the book on. He died young, and it took her a decade to find a publisher for the book, and then that book was published and it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. So you never kind of completely know, but my sense would be if you're getting the same advice or the same kind of rejections from agents again and again and again, that would probably be the time to kind of pause and work on something new. But give it a good shot. And as I say, there's lots of writers who've gone through loads and loads of agents before they found the one that worked for them.
That's hugely inspirational to kind of hear about those authors who've been through it and kind of come out the other side and have had huge successes. So yeah, I think that might be a nice point to kind of end on. Thank you so much, Tom, for answering all these questions. Thanks to everyone who sent in really great questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them. There's some really, really good ones in the chat. But yeah, if you're interested in kind of learning more from Tom, you can, of course, enroll in his How to Write a Novel course. He's always very much around to kind of answer questions from his students. And you will, of course, also get access to features like his daily masterclasses and the very popular live editing webinars, where you kind of get feedback on your writing during a webinar like this. And if you are considering enrolling, our next cohort is starting on September 2nd. And as we mentioned before, we do have a promo going at the moment. So there's a discount code where if you apply with the code September 24, you get $250 off. So it brings the price down to $9.99, and this code is valid until the end of the week. So yeah, go to reedsy.com/learning if you are interested in signing up, and we'll make sure to include the link and the promo code in the description as well. But yeah, thank you once again, Tom. It was really great to chat to you. Loved hearing all the answers.
Thank you, and And thank you everyone for the questions, kind of really, really good, interesting questions. I hope there was some useful advice in there for you to kind of take it away. And yeah, and as Felicia's saying, if you're interested in the course, do have a look. I think it would really help you kind of write and get that all important first draft down.
All right, amazing. Well, yeah, thanks everyone, and have a good evening, Tom, and see you guys around. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.